Hello, thank you for joining me today. My name is Cassandra Dinkelman and I'm the Education Support Officer at Down Syndrome Queensland. My email address is edsupport@downsyndromeqld.org.au, which will be on the screen very soon, as too will my contact phone number for work. This webinar is Understanding Down Syndrome. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or phone at the office. Thank you. Enjoy. In this webinar, we will look at the main characteristics that children with Down syndrome can present with and ways in which we can help them in the classroom to be included and to engage in learning. The most important thing to remember throughout is that no two children are the same, and no two children with Down syndrome are the same either. So for that reason, what works for one may not work for another. You need to know, understand, and work with the student in your care, so that you can best support and guide them in their learning experience, as with any other child. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional and historic custodians of the land on which I present from today, the Yagara people of Brisbane. I extend my acknowledgement to all First Nations people here today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So what will we be looking at today? We'll look at fact or fiction, what you might already know, what you might not already know, what is Down syndrome, common health issues, common characteristics, and implications. So then, fact or fiction, let's start with that. Answer true or false to the following questions. Children with Down syndrome are born to older mothers. Do you think that's true or false? While the chance of having a baby with Down syndrome does increase with maternal age, around 80% of babies with Down syndrome are born to mothers under 35, and 20% of those to mothers under 25. The average age of mothers giving birth to their first child is 30.7 in Australia. So that just gives you an idea. There are varying degrees of Down syndrome. True or false? False. Down syndrome is not an illness. Having Down syndrome doesn't make a person sick. Either a person has Down syndrome or they don't. However, a child's ability and skill set will differ greatly from one child to another or one student to another, just like the other children in your class. People with Down syndrome all look alike. False. While there are some physical features of Down syndrome that people may share, they have far more physical and personality characteristics in common with their families. Children with Down syndrome are more like other children than different. So for example, my son, in looks, personality, learning style, curiosity, he's definitely a mini-me, I would say. People with Down syndrome experience a full range of emotions. True. Just like everyone else, people with Down syndrome are not always happy. They can also be sad, angry, excited, scared, joyful. Their feelings can be hurt, and there can be days where they need emotional support, just like their peers. People with Down syndrome pick up new skills easily. True and false. So often students with Down syndrome need repetition and their developmental progress will be slower than their peers. But it's important to remember that they do want to learn, and often in times when you assume they're not going to pick something up, they absolutely will. People will learn with Down syndrome have a short lifespan. False. People with Down syndrome now live into their 60s and 70s. However, there are medical issues that are associated with someone with Down syndrome. Fortunately, as medical advances have improved, so too have the lifespan of people with Down syndrome. A variety of emotions. So just to give you an example of that range of emotions, my son expresses all of his emotions very clearly. I haven't captured all, but trust me, just like any of his peers, he's mastered quite the collection. Here's my example to you. Cheeky, worn out, scared, playful, nervous or anxious, joyful, disbelief, curious, sad, proud. So then, what is Down syndrome? It's a chromosomal anomaly resulting in a complete or partial extra copy of chromosome 21 in every cell of the body. Hence, sometimes it being referred to as T21 or trisomy 21. Approximately 1 in 1,100 babies will be born with Down syndrome in Australia, and that's due to the high rate of terminations. So that's approximately 290 babies born in Australia each year with Down syndrome. Down syndrome is named after John Langdon Down, who first described it in 1866, and the correct term in Australia is Down syndrome, not Downs with an apostrophe S, and the S is small for syndrome. There are 3 different types of Down syndrome. You can't tell without genetic testing. Must have genetic testing for a confirmation. So there's non-disjunction, which is more commonly known as trisomy 21, which represents 95% of the population with Down syndrome. People with this type have an extra 21st chromosome in every cell, and it's the most common form of Down syndrome. Then there's translocation, representing only 4% of the Down syndrome population. The physical characteristics are the same as T21, but it's caused when an extra copy of chromosome 21 is attached to another chromosome. This is then present in all cells of the body. And finally, mosaicism represents only 1% of the community with Down syndrome. For those people with mosaic Down syndrome, there are milder physical features and intellectual disability, and mosaicism is a mixture of cells. So some with the extra chromosome 21 and some without. No 2 individuals with Down syndrome will be exactly the same. Although there are over 120 characteristics, most individuals will only have 6 or 7 of them. Common health issues. So let's have a look at some of the common health issues amongst people with Down syndrome. Not every person will have each one of these, but they may experience several. Starting with eyesight. So up to 50% of individuals with Down syndrome will wear glasses, and I'll go into more detail in a minute. Heart issues, which could include hole in the heart, enlarged ventricles, and narrowed passages to lungs. Hypothyroidism, so a slow metabolism. So there could be weight issues with age. They may be more tired. Students may be more tired, may be more cold. They may struggle with constipation. Thyroid and heart conditions. The child may tire easily and may require allowances to be made for rest breaks. So schedule priority activities earlier in the day while the child still has plenty of energy. Be aware of possible heightened sensitivity or intolerances to temperatures. Monitor lunch breaks to ensure that the child is eating appropriate amounts of food to help them with that low energy. Muscle tone. So students with Down syndrome often experience low muscle tone, which means that they have a looseness in their ligaments and increased flexibility, which can have an effect on every activity that they do. Dental issues such as gum disease or dental bite, and often students with Down syndrome have trouble chewing and swallowing due to those lax muscle tones. Ear infections or hearing difficulties. So physical characteristics associated with Down syndrome contribute to inner, middle and outer ear problems. This might include things such as glue ear, and that occurs because the fluid is trapped behind the eardrum, and it's common because of the narrow eustachian tubes. Or otitis media, which refers to chronic draining of the ears. The outer ear canal is very narrow, making it difficult for normal self-cleaning mechanisms to operate efficiently. Or you might notice that earwax is more copious and harder than usual, resulting in the outer ear becoming blocked. So these conditions can all cause hearing loss of varying degrees, and up to 78% of children with Down syndrome have some form of hearing loss. Even a slight hearing loss can have a significant impact on the acquisition of speech and language. Sleep apnea. So obstructive sleep apnea and Down syndrome seem to go hand in hand in many cases. There's 50 to 100% incidence of obstructive sleep apnea in individuals with Down syndrome, with almost 60% of students with Down syndrome having abnormal sleep studies, and that increases with age. Respiratory infections. So particularly when they're younger, students with Down syndrome are more likely to get infections and require hospital admissions more regularly than other students. Leukemia, 10 to 20 times more likely to develop childhood leukemia, and it's a major cause of death for children under 10. Although they are, students with Down syndrome are less likely to experience other forms of cancer. Gastrointestinal issues such as constipation, celiac, or Hirschsprung's disease. And Hirschsprung's disease is a condition that affects the large intestine, the colon, and causes problems with toileting. And flat feet. So just to note, these are common medical issues which technically shouldn't affect school life at all, but they might explain absences or a history of the student that you're working with. Other common characteristics then. So other areas that we'll be focusing on in a little more detail will include vision differences, intellectual disability, delayed developmental milestones, hypotonia and motor skills, sensory processing, and speech and language difficulties. So let's get straight on to it then. Vision differences. So the picture on the left, although it is a bit blurry, apologies for that, is how we generally see a picture. Given it's an old television screen, however, that's generally how we would see a picture. This is how people with Down syndrome might see the same vision, the picture on the right, sorry. So up to 50% of people with Down syndrome will need to wear glasses, but even when they're wearing glasses, 100% of people with Down syndrome have poorer visual acuity than other people, than their typical peers. Visual acuity is still poor even when a person with Down syndrome is wearing correctly fitted glasses for either long or short sight, and this continues to increase with age. So then considerations within the classroom. You would need to be considering things such as enlarging images and worksheets, removing those unnecessary details where possible around the outsides, highlighting words or areas of focus in worksheets and information, choosing appropriate stationery items, we'll discuss that later, support the use of glasses and contacts. So for example, if you know that they wear those things, encourage them to wear them. Consider placement in the classroom, and that would be things such as lighting and glare. And use visibility tape on stairs and edges and doorways. I know for my son, because he has visual depth perception issues, when he walks around in a space that he's not familiar with, it takes him a bit longer because his footing isn't so sure. Intellectual disability. So an intellectual disability affects an individual's ability to understand, reason, acquire skills, and problem solve. And for most individuals with Down syndrome, they will fall into the mild to moderate level of intellectual disability. So the implications in the classroom would be that you would reduce the impact of the environment. And for example, that would be removing distractions. Utilize concrete and visual teaching opportunities every chance you get. Reteach and consolidate regularly. And consistency. Make sure that your expectations, the schedules and the routines are consistent so that the student has the most chance of succeeding. So examples are that that students with Down syndrome might be struggling with multi-step instructions or academic uptake and retention. It takes longer to pick up new ideas and skills or even process questions. So we need to make sure that we're giving students with Down syndrome the time they need to answer questions, the opportunity of repetition to learn those new skills, and repeated discussions and questioning to understand new ideas. And so curriculum considerations then. True inclusion is in a mainstream classroom with same age peers being exposed to the age equivalent curriculum. And in an inclusive classroom, you would see peer tutoring and mentoring, meaningful learning and tasks, high expectations. So really assuming competence of those students with Down syndrome, as you would with any other student, building to the future, adjustments to learning tasks and or learning environments dependent on what the student needs, and modifying tasks. So simplifying the content and the language, but maintaining the topics that the other students are learning about. Short-term memory. So short-term memory, a visual short-term memory is significantly better in students with Down syndrome than their verbal short-term memory. So verbal instructions are quickly forgotten. So it's important that for the memory for verbal instructions for students with Down syndrome is significantly delayed. So it's important that we keep those verbal instructions short. So just to give you an example, the standard short-term memory is 7 items for the average person. And in a child with Down syndrome, it is on average 4 items, but can be as low as one or two. So the context of that is you might be getting ready for the next lesson. Okay, students, we're getting ready for the next lesson. You are going to need these things, and we list them off. I'm sure we've all done it. But a student with Down syndrome potentially will only remember 1 to 4 of those. So that's not true for everyone. It is a generalization, and some will have better short-term or working memories than their peers. Some will have worse. As an example of the visual effect, let's have a look at a picture now. I'll give you a short amount of time to look at the detail, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. Okay, ready? Time's up. How many light bulbs were there? Does the suitcase have a clock on it? How many propeller blades are there? What colour was the pattern on the bottom of the skateboard? What word is written on the luggage tag? How many stickers are visible in the picture? How many red stripes are on the umbrella? Now, it doesn't matter how many times I do this activity, I still can't remember the answer to all of those, and I'm really glad I've written them down. But what I'm trying to show you is that to see or to have a visual to support that verbal instruction absolutely helps. So let's go through those questions again, and a little more slowly because that also helps. How many light bulbs are there? What colour is the pattern on the bottom of the skateboard? How many stickers are visible in the image? What word is written on the luggage tag? How many red stripes are on the umbrella? Now, I'm going to give you a bit of leeway on this because I assume a pattern, which means that there would be 4, but I can only see 3. Does the suitcase have a clock on it? How many propeller blades are there? And again, I'm going to give a bit of leeway for this one. I'm not sure if that's 1 or 2. Does it count as 1 or 2? Doesn't matter. You get the idea. Was it easier to answer the questions with or without the static visual to refer back to? So let's look at that short-term memory then. So the visual supports for learning. Visual short-term memory for students with Down syndrome is significantly better than verbal short-term memory. Have I made that clear? I think I've said that before. Verbal instructions are very quickly forgotten. So using visual prompts such as stop signs, bag areas, lunchbox areas, bottle areas, and supports, we'll go into that in more depth in our visual supports webinar, but include things such as timetables, calendars, task cards. You could also include these at home, which helps support that importance of learning something such as visual. Limit verbal instructions. I can't make that clear enough. Make sure where you can, you're giving 1-step instructions with a visual. Break down the tasks into small 1-step instructions. And for example, instead of saying, go back to your desk, get out your pencil, your glue, your scissors and your worksheet, you might say, okay, let's go back to our desk. Now I can see everyone's back at their desk. Get out your pencil. And then once you can see that they're starting to understand there's a process to this, you could increase that over time, but certainly start off with 1 and 1. So delayed developmental milestones. Often students with Down syndrome need longer to reach developmental milestones, but they will reach them. They need longer to develop and practice those new skills. And often students with Down syndrome are accessing early interventions or have accessed early interventions. And they might include things such as, or people such as experts, such as physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech pathologists, developmental therapists, hydrotherapists, music therapists. The list goes on. So children with Down syndrome usually develop gross and fine motor skills in the same order as typically developing children, but often with some delay. And this is an example of the delay we're talking about. I've circled the students with Down syndrome range, and next to it is the typically developing students range. But most interestingly in this, I find this all very fascinating when I look at it. Most interesting in that selection is the 2-word phrases. So have a look. For students with Down syndrome, they're achieving that between the ages of 2 and 7.5. And some will be outside of that range as well. Whereas for typically developing students, that's 15 to 32 months. And then equally interesting for me is the bowel control. So for students with Down syndrome, that could be between 2 and 7 years, typically. But for children who are typically developing, that could be between 16 and 42 months. It's a big difference. Next, we're looking at hypotonia and motor skills. So hypotonia is a low muscle tone, which is one of the most common characteristics of Down syndrome. It's where the muscles lack strength and stamina, leading to individuals becoming tired very quickly. It affects gross and fine motor skills. Gross and fine motor activities need to be a focus. Need to spend a lot of time on these skills, perfecting them, and have high expectations. And things that will make a difference would include things such as stationary and activities, and I'll give you some examples of those as well. But muscle response with hypotonia is generally slower, and the muscles are weaker, which means that students with Down syndrome are lacking stamina and strength. You may also find that students with Down syndrome have shorter than average fingers and broad hands, which also makes fine motor activities difficult for them. So here are some of the resources that you might find useful. A calculator's there because it's a big calculator with big buttons. So in the classroom, children might experience difficulty in areas such as, these sorts of areas: holding a pencil correctly, forming letters when writing, writing neatly and in between the lines, cutting, writing for extended periods. So do those activities in the morning when they are freshest and most alert. When students are using an iPad, start with a finger and then move on to a stylus. And I've got a picture of a few stylus there as an example. You would go for bigger is better with those sorts of things. Developing strength and strengthening motor skills. So you could consider the use of a pencil grip or triangular pencil. If the student is having difficulty cutting, use spring-loaded scissors like the ones I've got on the screen, or adult-directed scissors. Lots of practice with tweezers and marbles, lacing and weaving activities, and consider the use of fine motor kits in the classroom too. You can either make these or buy them. So activities to develop gross motor would include things such as physical activities such as climbing, throwing, catching balls. Hands can be strengthened through shoveling experiences in the sandpit or in the garden, if you've got a garden in your class, with your class. Waving streamers or ribbons so that they're promoting shoulder strength. Hammering experiences help students develop accuracy in their arm movements. Pouring activities in water play promotes stability and control. Ball skills, including bouncing, catching, throwing, and that promotes stability and planning for arm and hand movements. And clapping games and finger play promote bilateral coordination, so the ability to use both hands. And these can be incidental things. They don't have to be things where you've actually sat down and said, we have 5 minutes at this time every day, or they could. But you could do them in times such as when you're lining up, maybe have a clapping game with your partner or an activity to do with your partner. Maybe you offer a game station at playtime, or maybe even in the bath time if you're suggesting activities for parents. And here we are, some of the activities I was explaining about. All of these sorts of things would be great for fine motor skills. So sensory processing. How do you recognize a sensory processing issue? When sensory information is gathered, the individual has difficulty processing it and sends out an inappropriate response. So what's happening is you might see the student is doing something that doesn't look appropriate, and that's because they're having difficulty processing that information. So that could look like rough play, poor body awareness, clumsy or awkward movements, unusually high or low activity levels, poor self-control. Everything goes into their mouth, jaw clenching or teeth grinding or thumb sucking, maybe tactile defensiveness or oral hypersensitivity. or overreaction to loud noises and sounds. Oh, here are some strategies as well. So strategies for overcoming some of those issues or concerns. You could be offering weighted blankets or toys or short, heavy tasks like manually sharpening pencils or moving a box around or carrying the books to the library or stapling. Chew toys, all those three down the right-hand side. So there are chew pencil toppers, chew wristbands and chewlery, or asking parents to provide chewy things in the student's lunchbox. Reduce noise levels or offer noise cancelling headphones like we've got there. Use alternate seating, like swivel chairs, gym ball, wiggle chairs or stand-up desks even. Use a carpet square, a small mat or masking tape on the floor to give those limitations that a student might need, or have a box for a sensory break. Offer movement breaks too. It's often difficult for students to stay still that whole time, so they may need movement breaks. And I would say to you, if you have an OT at your disposal in your school or in your classroom or someone you know, they will be your best resource for all of these sorts of things. Okay, so here is a video of people with Down syndrome, and it's titled Things That People with Down Syndrome Are Sick of Hearing. I love it.
Because you never know what might come out of my mouth.
Like, what is Down syndrome, Bella's saying?
What makes you angry?
Smoking. Nigel Farage.
You don't like him?
Not in the slightest.
People with Down syndrome can't have relationships.
Well, obviously they can have relationships.
Kissing is my favourite pastime,
Yeah.
I reckon.
So you're really romantic.
Oh, so romantic.
Yeah.
I like William Hague and George Osborne and Justin Bieber. Not David Cameron though.
People with Down syndrome can't learn. Yeah. All right then.
Yeah.
Yes, they can. Maybe sometimes they might need a little bit of a push.
Yep.
I've got qualification in customer service, qualification in hairdressing.
I passed all 10 of my GCSEs.
People with Down syndrome are just normal people.
You know, will she be able to do this? Will she be able to do that? And I say, yeah, she'll be able to do everything. It's just we'll take the scenic route. This is our pet hate. Adults with Down syndrome are like children.
Oh.
Do you ever have people like come up to you and talk to you like you're a child?
Yes, it's patronising.
Yeah.
But some people do the head tilt as well. Oh, bless her. Isn't she lovely? How old is she?
Infantilisation, do one.
Yes, please.
Some people say it's a disease. It's not.
No.
Down syndrome is a condition which is caused by an extra chromosome.
Doesn't stop you from doing anything, does it?
Well, exactly.
We bring something different to the world that other people can't.
People sometimes do come up with words like Down syndrome sufferer. The only thing I suffer from is bad attitudes.
Those with Down syndrome can't live independently.
I hope not. Of course they can, because I live independently.
Hopefully wanting to live with my boyfriend.
Wouldn't mind living somewhere with my girlfriend as well.
And have a life and go out with friends and having a nightlife as well.
I get my ensuite back if you move out.
So you want me to move out today?
No. Those with Down syndrome can't have jobs.
Well, that's wrong.
Of course they can. Yeah, of course they can.
Yeah.
I've had so many different jobs.
I work in a hair salon and I love it.
Yeah.
Went through retail, office work, went back to retail, and then went back to office work, and then media.
I'm also an actor as well.
I got a job as an actor and a dancer.
You're famous one day, Tommy.
Yeah, well, even more.
One day I might be put in EastEnders.
But she can be anything she wants to be. Well, unless she wants to play for Liverpool, in which case...
It's quite upsetting to hear about something like that.
It was 90% of people were getting rid of it because they found out they were Down syndrome, and I thought, that's shocking.
Some people call this Down syndrome serious handicaps, but it's not.
Babies with Down syndrome can be aborted at 40 weeks.
I've heard of that.
Whereas a baby without Down syndrome, obviously the cut-off point is 24 weeks. So I think there's an ethical question there.
If we can all lead amazingly active lives, can't we?
Yeah.
She doesn't like the testing.
Do you wish you didn't have Down syndrome?
No. Why? It's just me, it's part of me.
I may have Down syndrome, but without it, I don't think I'd really be me.
I don't wish that. I wish that people will see Down syndrome in a positive light.
My motto in life is Down syndrome, so what?
So let's move on to the next area then, speech and language difficulties. Why do individuals with Down syndrome often have speech and language difficulties? Well, there are some medical reasons for that. It can be from a range of these things or one of these things, anatomical differences such as a smaller jaw or higher arched palate. It could be oral motor skills such as speech apraxia, difficulty speaking, difficulty with the speed of speech, a range of motion or coordination. It could be from hearing loss, such as narrow tubes or the fluid in their ears, or memory issues, so phonological memory or reading difficulty. It's important to separate, though, receptive from expressive skills. So research shows that people with Down syndrome usually have better receptive language than expressive language, which is why we recommend using assistive communication devices for students with Down syndrome. These can be things such as a POD, which is Pragmatic Organisation Dynamic Display books, or communication boards, lanyards, or iPads and apps. We can also use sign language such as Auslan or keyword sign. So receptive language is that language that the student is taking on, the language they are receiving and understanding. And then the expressive language is the language they are speaking or the way they are communicating. It's important that we show students with Down syndrome some of these options if they don't have these available to them already, and give them ways to communicate their personal needs. Implications in the classroom. So we need to make sure that we allow take-up or response time. So giving students extra time, locating that information in their understanding. Imagine that you have in your brain a filing cabinet. And if it's filed away easily, it's easy to find, but a student with Down syndrome may not be able to locate that information as easily. So it may take them a little longer. Conversation patterns need to be explicitly talked. And this could be through things such as social stories, maybe how to have conversations, you know, that toing and froing that happens in conversations. Give explicit playtime, so allow incidental conversations with peers, because a lot can be learned through play. Give the students opportunity to relay information. So each morning, for example, you might ask them what they did the previous night. Or Monday, you might ask them what they did on the weekend. And it could be as simple as saying, I read a story. So model and correct sentence structure and language patterns when speaking to the student. So rephrase and repeat. For example, they might say to you, I came to shops. And you might say back to them, I went to the shops. Can you say that? I went to the shops. Using something such as a home diary, where you're using it for show and share, not a communication book where you're talking about behaviour and toileting, but something where the student can share with their family something they've done during the day. A simple way to do this might be to take a photo during the day and then they take that photo home so that there can be a conversation about what's in the picture, what happened, what did you enjoy, those sorts of things. Incorporate assistive technologies where required or where possible. And difficulties with vocabulary. So using simple language, use the same language consistently. So as an example to that, in maths, if you're talking about plus or add or addition, pick one. And if you're going to refer to one of those and need to use a different one, then explain that it's the same as the first one. The use of assistive technologies such as iPads, pods, or First and Then. There are many different apps that can help with speech language concerns. Incorporate language into all activities in the classroom, utilising their abilities and skills. So offering communication or expecting communication and using choice boards where possible. When you're speaking with a student with Down syndrome, as you would with any other student, use eye contact, expect eye contact. Use signing, or if that's what you're expecting of the other students. Use signing if that's appropriate and known. Allow take up and speaking time. Be patient. Discourage others from talking for them. Consistently use the same language in all settings. Essentially, what I'm asking you to do is what you're expecting for other students, you're expecting of these students too. Okay, so we have now come to the end of our webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Thank you very much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.